For today's video, I'll be walking you through how I set up this beginner-friendly planted tank. I've designed this to be as simple and budget-friendly as possible while keeping to a black and white contrasting theme with vibrant pops of green. Keep in mind that this setup is considered budget-friendly by UK and to some extent wider European standards, but prices will change depending on your country. Whether you're brand new to the planted tank hobby or just looking for a low maintenance setup that's easy to build, this is the type of tank I'd recommend you start with. So getting into the tank setup, and I'm using a 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon Diversa aquarium, which is the cheapest option in my area, coming in at £29.99. These tanks are very popular and easy to find in Europe, but some people do overlook them because of their low price, presuming that they are low quality. Personally, I have 9 of them in my fish room and I plan to get more, and I've never once had an issue with them, so I do highly recommend them. Adding a background to your tank is optional, but personally I do prefer to use one, and it enhances the black and white colour contrast for the fish tank's theme. There's a few ways that you can do this, but instead of using the expensive aquascaping backgrounds, I've chosen to use some cheap window privacy film from Amazon, which sticks to the glass with a little spray of water, and it's very easy to cut to size. Black paint is another cheap option commonly used in the hobby, but personally I prefer the window film as it's quick and easy to remove if needed. This roll cost £8.49, but it's enough for 5 tanks of this size, so if this is your first tank, keep the spare somewhere safe in case multi-tank syndrome kicks in. For the substrate, I'm using Pettex Roman Gravel, which is widely available here in Europe, but it can be difficult to find in other areas. Prices fluctuate a lot with this specific product, and I managed to get this one for £12.48, but I saw it go as high as £18 recently depending on the vendor. I only used a quarter of this bag as well because that's all I had left, but it's plenty for this specific aquascape. Another advantage of this specific gravel is that it's inert, meaning that it won't tweak the pH levels of the tank like aragonite based products can, and it won't release ammonia like some aqua soils and capped dirt, keeping things as easy as possible from the beginning. Since this is a small lightweight nano tank, it's easy to level the gravel out by simply tilting and shaking the tank to get it nice and even. So moving on to hardscape, and I've chosen black lava rock, which fits the theme of this tank perfectly, while it's also one of the cheapest hardscape options in the hobby. I got mine from Horizon Aquatics where it's sold by weight, and since lava rock is extremely porous, filled with tiny little air bubbles, it is very light, meaning you get a good amount for your money. This particular batch cost me £20, but you can definitely get less if you want and still get this great effect without spending as much money. Beyond the aesthetics, lava rock also offers a ton of surface area for beneficial microorganisms to colonize, helping to maintain safe and stable water parameters, especially in the flow of the filter that we'll add later. For the most part, black lava rock is also inert, so it won't tweak my pH levels like a limestone based rock such as Sirius stone, keeping things as stable as possible. This is the design that I ended up settling on, and I didn't do anything fancy. I just stacked the rocks in a way that I liked to create caves that my future livestock can hide in if they like. Moving a tank after filling it with the water can be tricky, so it's best to position it now. With the tank in place, I fill it with regular tap water, as I'll be keeping Medaka rice fish, ram's horn snails and Neocaridina shrimp inside of it. None of these require reverse osmosis water. Tap water also contains small amounts of beneficial microorganisms that help process toxins and keep your livestock safe. I use a tap water conditioning product to neutralize chlorine, chloramines and certain heavy metals that can be common in tap water and interfere with the beneficial microorganisms. That said, I have seen a few people say that these aren't actually needed because the beneficial microorganisms in the tap water have been in there with the chlorine and chloramines all the way from the pump station before getting into the tank. As you're going to see, this tank cycles perfectly fine just using the naturally occurring microorganisms, so I really don't know either way, but personally I do still choose to use one, but it may not be necessary. So moving on to filtration, and I'm using the Night Crew Slim Nano Hang-on Back filter. This is a small and effective filter, but you definitely have to keep up with filter maintenance or it can cause leaks, but other options like sponge filters work perfectly well too. Unfortunately, this particular filter uses the cartridge system, which I'm really not a fan of. The included filter floss can clog, blocking water flow, causing the filter to leak if it's not replaced frequently, and this is a common problem I see people have with this filter. Replacement cartridges cost £9.99 for 6 of them, and depending on your tank's bioload, you may need to be replacing these every month or so, and unfortunately it is essential because all of the media is included as one solid cartridge. So instead of using the stock cartridges, I'm going to customize the filter media, and in the long run it works out far cheaper and a lot easier. I use 30 ppi foam as my biological media, and it works perfectly fine, and I have a video on it that I'll link in the video description, and then I cut a small amount of filter floss to act as my mechanical filtration, and both work perfectly together. If you're here in the UK, I get both of these from Filter Pro, where it costs £5 per sheet, so £10 total, and they're about the same price as a single set of replacement cartridges that can last as little as 6 months. Thankfully, cutting the foam is very easily because the handy little cartridge that Nicrew sent you is the perfect size, so you literally use it as a template and cut around it with a pair of scissors. You only need a very small piece of filter floss that'll fit between the two media bays, but again I use the cartridge to get the width right, and then I usually cut that to about 1/3 in height. Once the filter media is in place, I pop it on the side of the filter, plug it in, and then I pour some water into it to get it running as quickly as possible. At this stage, the tank is set up with the hardscape and a running filter, so we are ready to start the cycling process. Now there's several ways to cycle an aquarium, and I have a dedicated in-depth video explaining the exact method that I used for this particular tank, as well as why I choose it, and I link that in the video description. In short, the specific method I prefer is called the dark start method, where we add an ammonia source and let the tank cycle naturally over time. I use Dr. Tim's ammonia solution, which costs £11.99 per bottle, but since you only need a small amount of this to cycle a single tank, you can get the smallest bottle you can find to cut costs further. Alternatively, some people choose to add small amounts of fish food and let it decompose as their ammonia source, which is a lot cheaper but less accurate for your dosing. An easy way to remember the dosing for Dr. Tim's ammonia solution is that you add 1 drop per litre of water, and usually you'll have around 80% of the maximum volume of the tank as water volume because of hardscape, substrate and tank accessories taking up space, but with this method, if you just stick with the maximum volume, it really shouldn't be an issue. Now it is important to note that I haven't actually turned the light on for this tank yet, because nutrient levels with this cycling method are going to spike during the cycle, which can lead to a lot of excess algae growth in the tank that can easily be avoided by not turning your light on at this stage. With the ammonia dosed in the tank, I do a quick water parameter check to ensure that everything is on track at this stage. While I do recommend that you get yourself a liquid test kit if possible, I do know some people who use the cheaper dipsticks, and I know some people who don't use a test kit at all. Now we simply wait and let nature take its course as these tiny microorganism colonies grow to the required size. Cycling a tank using this method can take anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks depending on factors such as pH and water temperature. Unfortunately, my tap water has a pH of 6.4, and since this is an unheated room temperature tank that I started during the winter, the water temperature is averaging around 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. While this is definitely out of recommended optimal parameters for beneficial bacteria, it's perfectly fine for beneficial archaea, so it will still get the job done, it's just going to take a little bit longer. The first few weeks of a cycle are usually uneventful, and with no light on the tank, there's no algae growth, no diatoms, and no debris buildup on the filter floss either, so essentially you could literally just leave this to do its own thing for a couple of weeks. However, evaporation still occurs even in unheated tanks during the colder months, so it's important to top up the water as required to make sure the filter is able to suck the water up and keep everything running. I don't do anything fancy, I just get regular tap water and get it into the tank as effectively as possible during the cycling process, but if you are using a water conditioner, remember to add it with the new tap water because of the new chlorine and chloramines being added. After a couple of weeks, things start to kick into gear, but remember this particular tank is a lot slower than usual because of my low pH and low water temperature. As you can see in these test results, the beneficial microorganisms are starting to convert the ammonia into nitrite and then into nitrate, a key sign that the cycle is progressing in the tank. Despite all these excess nutrients in the tank, there's still no algae growth as there's no direct light for photosynthesis, making the process as smooth and hassle-free as possible. It's important to note that as the cycle progresses, the initial ammonia dose will deplete, so it's important to top it up and keep feeding those beneficial microorganism colonies. If you're using an ammonia solution, simply redose it as needed as you did back at the start of the cycle, and if you're using the fish food method for your ammonia source, add a little bit more fish food at this stage. If you do have a water parameter test kit, you'll know that the tank is fully cycled when it can process an ammonia dose down to 0 ppm ammonia and 0 ppm nitrite within 24 hours of the dose being added. This indicates that the microorganism colonies have grown large enough to remove toxins, helping to keep your fish safe, and that brings me on to adding fish to the tank. By complete chance, one of my local aquatic shops put a post on their Facebook page saying they'd got some platinum Medaka in stock at 3 fish for £12, so I rushed over to pick some up. Any type of Medaka are difficult to find here in the UK, especially right now, but the platinum Medaka variety are the specific ones I wanted for this tank because they contrast so well and stick to the theme. Medaka rice fish are perfect for this type of aquarium too because they stay small, they are very peaceful, they have a low bioload, and they'll thrive at this water temperature. While not strictly necessary, I did choose to do a large partial water change before I added the fish to the tank. This is because during the cycling process, other compounds that our test kits can't necessarily detect can increase TDS levels. Without very specific types of plants to absorb these excess compounds and help manage your TDS, they can continue to grow over time and become an issue, but a partial water change will get them dealt with. I also added a light to the tank at this stage and I opted for the Haiga HG058. In the interests of full disclosure, Haiga did send me that light for free to test and I have a dedicated review video on it which I'll link in the video description. Now this is a solid little aquarium light and because of this it's been selling very well, so it's currently sold out here in the UK, so I can't check its exact price, but it is typically priced similarly to the Ciora SR616, its only real competitor on the market in my opinion at the time of recording. I also have a review video of that Ciora light which I link in the video description as well because it's a great little light as well. Now there are some differences between those two aquarium lights, but for this specific tank I honestly class both of them as completely interchangeable with each other, so I'd recommend you check for both and buy whichever one is cheapest in your area. This is because I'm setting the light to full intensity with a 6-hour photo period each day, and both of these light models come with that 6-hour default setting built into the timer, while other options like the Night Crew variant don't come with the 6-hour setting. After the water change there was some debris floating around in the tank, but the filter floss in this filter setup will be able to deal with this over an amount of time. You can drip acclimate your fish if you prefer, but since Gateshead Guppies, where I purchased the Medaka, is a few miles from my home and there was some visible fish waste in the bag when I got back, I just opted to get the fish in the tank as soon as possible. Instead of adding the bag's water to the tank, I poured the water through a net, discarding it to avoid introducing any ammonia buildup from the fish waste while catching the fish in the net. Then I carefully transferred my new fish into the tank and let them swim freely. Finally, I also moved my 2 other adult platinum Medaka that I'd had for a few months by this point out of one of my other aquariums over to this one so they can join the 3 new juveniles. Moving on, and we get to adding the plants to the tank, and in my opinion with this specific cycling method it's best to add the plants once the cycle has completed, because with the dark start method, certain plants can melt due to the high ammonia levels. I picked up 2 pots of Anubias Petite and 1 pot of Anubias Nanocoin, as these are hardy, easy to find and very low maintenance, making them perfect for this tank. In hindsight, 1 pot of Nanocoin and 1 Anubias Petite would probably have been enough for this specific setup, and it would have kept costs even lower. I had a little play around holding the plants up to the tank to try and decide where I wanted to place them, and reduce the amount of time my hands would be in the tank stressing my fish. All of these plants stay small, making them suitable for these nano tanks, but the nanocoin will get a little bit larger than the petite, so that's going to be my centerpiece plant. I actually made a mistake here and I forgot to swish the rhizome roots around in a cup of water to remove any tiny leftover pieces of rock wool, and you can see them floating around, but the filter floss should filter this out soon. Then I added both Anubias petite plants to one side of the tank and I tried to trap them under a rock rather than secure them in place with glue or thread to keep costs as low as possible. This is what the tank looked like at this stage of the build, and after noticing how much particulate matter was actually in the tank, I decided to do another partial water change to give the filter some help and leeway. Snails are optional in this setup, but a week after adding my Medaka, I introduced 2 pink ram's horn snails to help manage any leftover fish food in the tank. Many people assume that these snails are strictly tropical since they originate from Florida, but they are perfectly fine in room temperature tanks. Because these pink ram's horns are hardy and prolific breeders, they are usually far cheaper than other popular snails such as Neurites, making them a budget-friendly option, but like I said, they are optional and you don't have to add them. When I first added the snails to the tank, some of the Medaka swam down to have a quick look just to see if it was food, but after that, both species go about their business each day and completely ignore each other. The snail's main role in this tank is to consume any leftover food while also helping manage algae growth, keeping the tank cleaner with minimal effort required from me. Here's some recent B-roll video footage of the tank while I talk about shrimp because I haven't actually ordered them yet. It's still winter at the time of recording this video, and Neocaridina Shrimp face similar challenges to the pink ram's horn snails when it comes to the cold outdoor temperatures in the UK winter. They are perfectly fine to keep in indoor unheated tanks, but shipping them in cooler weather can be risky. I usually order my shrimp from Best Aquarium Shrimps UK on eBay, but since the seller is located at the opposite end of the country, I rather wait for the warmer temperatures to come before having them shipped to me. Fortunately, things are starting to warm up, so I'm hoping to be able to order some snowball shrimp next month to complete the setup. These shrimp will help the tank by eating soft algae and consuming any leftover food, making them a valuable addition to the tank. Their white colour also fits well with the contrasting theme of the aquarium, helping to complete the look and bring everything together. I already keep Medaka rice fish, Neocaridina shrimp and ram's horn snails together in 4 other unheated tanks, and they coexist perfectly without any aggression. So that brings us up to the present day, and the tank is currently 102 days old at the time of recording, and as you can see, there have been a few small changes. The most notable change is that there is some algae developing on the lava rock, and this is likely due to the photo period of the light. To try and address this, I've reduced the light intensity down from 100% to 80% to see if that helps. One issue that I've noticed is that my ram's horn snails avoid the lava rock, which I assume is because they are scraper type algae eaters. They rely on gliding across the smooth surfaces in the tank to feed, and rough, uneven textures like the lava rock seem to make it difficult for them to graze effectively, and they don't seem to like to be on that surface. However, this shouldn't be an issue for the shrimp, as they are picker type algae eaters that pull algae off the surfaces of the tank. With any luck, once I finally get some shrimp in here, they'll be able to deal with the algae and get it under control. Another change that I made was adding a small amount of Amazon frogbit to the tank, and my goal was to reduce the phosphate buildup, which seems to be a factor in the algae growth. Unfortunately, the cool water temperature of 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit isn't ideal for the frogbit, so it's not thriving or doing anything in this setup. The last change to the tank is a minor adjustment to the plant placements. Since this tank only contains slow-grown plants, I perform a monthly partial water change to manage nitrate, phosphate and TDS. During the water change, the water flow from the water top-up stage dislodged one of the Anubias petite plants, as they are not glued to the hardscape. Like many potted rhizome plants, a single pot can actually contain multiple Anubias plants, and one of these came loose and split into 2 separate plants. That's why I mentioned earlier, in hindsight, I probably could have made do with one Anubias petite pot and kept the costs down, but I took the other plant and popped it on the left hand side. Overall, I'm really happy with how this tank turned out and I'm really enjoying watching it. The Medaka rice fish are healthy and active, and even though it's still winter, there has been a slight increase in temperatures recently, and I've noticed the males chasing the females, which suggests I might see some eggs soon. The ram's horn snails are constantly foraging for food and appear to do well, but like I mentioned, they do seem to avoid the lava rock if possible. However, I have noticed some mild nutrient deficiencies in the Anubias, such as holes that may indicate a lack of potassium in the tank. I am thinking of getting a specialist potassium fertilizer to try and address this, because I already have general purpose liquid fertilizers, but with the algae already starting to grow in the tank, I don't want to increase the other nutrients that could fuel further algae growth. The filter has been perfectly fine at maintaining safe and stable water parameters and keeping the toxic chemicals under control, ensuring the health of my fish. However, it does struggle with mechanical filtration, allowing small harmless debris particles to remain suspended in the water, which does affect the overall appearance of the tank. Now, to be fair, this particular filter is rated for smaller tanks than this one, so it could simply be an issue that the gallons per hour water flow of the filter is not high enough to get the tank's water through that filter floss enough times per hour. In the future, I might upgrade the filter on this aquarium, but for now I want to focus on small weekly partial water changes, targeting the debris suspended in the water column to see if that can help. Here's some recent B-roll of the tank while I go over the costs for this specific setup. As I mentioned earlier, these prices are based on UK costs at the time of recording, and things tend to be far cheaper over in the United States and a lot of other countries. I've tracked these costs in 3 different ways to give a better perspective on the potential expenses for this type of setup. The first one includes everything at full price and brings the total cost of the project to £226.27. This assumes that you've purchased all of the items individually, even though many of them can be spread across multiple tanks. If you are setting up your very first aquarium and only plan to keep one tank, you can reduce this number by opting for smaller bags of gravel and smaller quantities of filter floss and other items used for the build. The second total is £176.01, and this is a more realistic estimate of what I personally paid for this specific setup. This is because I keep multiple aquariums in my fish room, and I can spread some of the costs out over different tanks, such as the gravel, filter media, the liquid test kits, and a few other things. An example of this is how I said I only used 1/4 of the bag of gravel for this tank, and I used the rest of that bag of gravel for other aquariums. The third total came in at £116.05, and this is the most budget friendly option, leaving out everything that I mentioned as optional throughout the video, while also presuming you keep multiple aquariums and can spread the cost of things like gravel across multiple tanks. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I hope it's been helpful, and I really like the look of this tank, so much so that I'm actually thinking of trying the exact same concept in a far larger 29 gallon or 110 litre tank next month. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you have a good day, and good luck with your tank if you decide to give this type of aquarium a go in your own fish room.